What's up, YouTube? Here in Stockton, California, about to leave the in-laws, headed to Capital Casino for the Meetup game. Before we get to that, I want you all to check out the Fade the Mahoney podcast. If you're into sports betting, it's a channel by a couple of buddies of mine. Premise is he's terrible at sports betting, so you want to fade his picks. Anyway, let's jump into the vlog.
Cigarette smoke till it's in my head, take the bed away. Let it burn, let it burn, let it burn. Let it burn, let it burn. Hey.
All right, let's jump right into the action. First hand at this brand new table, we decided to do a bomb pot. I have 5 deuce offsuit and completely whiff. That's not important. What is important is the details of the game. We are playing 1-3 no limit with a $500 max buy-in, but something that this casino does, which I think is really cool, is you're allowed to match the biggest stack in the room. That's right, in the room. If somebody else at another table has $2,000, you can buy in for $2,000. Back to the hand, 5 deuce offsuit, we completely whiff, have to fold and move on to the next hand. I then pick up ace queen of spades. There's a limp for $3. An older gentleman makes it 20. I 3-bet to 65. He's the only caller. We go heads up to a flop, which comes king 8 deuce with 2 spades, and he check folds to my $80 bet. All right, now we're heading in the right direction. In the next interesting hand of note, we have another bomb pot. I have 8 deuce offsuit. Not something I'm particularly excited about until the flop comes 10-8 deuce with 2 hearts. We flop bottom 2. Goes check check to me. Obviously, I'm going to be betting here. I bet $70 into the $80 pot. The gentleman to my left quickly calls. When he calls here, I think he's going to have a lot of draws. He didn't really seem to have much of a decision. It now folds to the button, who is Think Blue Poker. Go check out his channel. And he goes deep into the tank. He's playing about $370. And so while he's thinking, I come to the conclusion that if he does decide to jam, I'm just going to have to go with it. There are a number of draws here, and flopping bottom 2 on a wet board, I just don't see any way I could fold it. After some time, he does eventually announce that he's all in. I now look to the player to my left who's playing about 500. I announce, well, I can't imagine giving the money to a nicer guy than Think Blue, so I reship it in there. And now the guy to my left goes into the tank, shows his buddy behind him what he has, says, I can't believe I'm going to have to fold this, and eventually does fold. I don't remember the exact details of what exactly happened next, but Steve, Think Blue, does tell me that he has a jack-high flush draw. I let him know that I flopped bottom 2. The turn then comes an offsuit jack. He's like, all right, now I got some more outs. And the river, unfortunately for me, comes another jack. He makes running jacks for running trips. Pretty brutal run out. Obviously, he has a number of outs here with his jack 5 of hearts. He could make, like I said, the running 2 pair, the running trips, the heart. And unfortunately, we are going to lose this about $800 pot. This is when the guy to my left lets us know that he actually would have beat us both. He said he had 9-7 for the open ender, would have hit the jack. So I would have came in 3rd place if all of them called. As far as Think Blue's play, from a strategy perspective, obviously I don't really like it. I think when I bet this large, it's going to look like I have a really good hand. Really good hands are probably going to be something like top pair, 2 pair, or a big draw. And against big draws, his jack-high flush draw just doesn't do that well. I could be betting the nut flush draw. I could be betting some combo draws. And again, if I flop 2 pair or better, I'm just never going to be folding. I think if I even had a weak enough hand, like let's say ace 10, I think I'm probably going to go with it as well, unless there's significant action before me. And so once I bet this large, I think that he should just be folding on the button here with his flush draw. But he decided to gamble it up. Kudos to him. He got there. And we're going to have to try to get the money from somebody else. For this next hand, we actually have a really interesting situation. Fish Poker walks by the table and lets us know the winner of the next hand is going to win a free t-shirt. As my parents always said, if it's free, it's for me. There are a couple of limps, and I look down at Jack 7 offsuit. I make it $25. The under-the-gun limper, who I've played a few hands with, is the only caller. The flop comes 7-6-5, 2 hearts and a spade, and the under-the-gun limper leads for $30. Flopping top pair, I'm not going to be going anywhere. Dealer, let's see a turn. The turn is the 9 of spades, now picking up a second flush draw. My opponent checks. Here I'm going to be trying to get to showdown as cheaply as possible. I check it back. The river is now the 8 of spades, completing a straight on the board as well as a backdoor flush. He now checks, having the jack of spades in my hand. I block the nut straight of jack 10 as well as the backdoor flush, so I decide I'm going to be overbetting the pot. I bet $150, and he calls pretty quickly, revealing that he has ace 8 for turning the straight. We chop it up. As far as his call, I really don't like it. Obviously, he's just calling to win half of the pot, which at this point is only about $55. I guess he decided he really wanted that free t-shirt as well. Fish Poker was nice enough to give both of us a shirt. Go check out his channel. In this hand, there's a straddle to $6. There is a limp. I now make it $30 with ace-jack offsuit. The player on the button, who is a player that I saw at another table that apparently knows that I'm a vlogger, flats on the button. I originally thought he was coming over to mix it up with me. It turns out later on I found out he was actually a bit tighter than I had expected. The limper calls, and we go 3 ways to a flop, which comes ace-7-4 with 2 spades. The limper checks. I decide to check having the ace of spades. Figure it's going to be hard for me to get multiple streets of value here. I kind of want to play this deceptively. And now the button bets $45. The limper calls, and I gave it a little bit of thought, thinking about whether I should be check raising this flop. I ended up deciding just a flat. I think check raising the flop is a little bit too strong. I am a little bit scared that the player on the button could have a hand like ace-queen. The turn is an offsuit 5, and now the limper checks. I decide that I'm going to be checking, and the button checks it back quickly as well. River is an offsuit 10, the limper checks, and I decide to check as the one hand that I did have in bad shape, ace-10, has gotten there. I do want to give the button a chance to bet some of his missed draws as played. He does in fact take the bite and bets $85. The limper folds, and at this point I don't think I have any choice but to call. I have under-rep the strength of my hand. I am getting over 3.5 to 1, so I only have to be right about 20% of the time. I make the call, and we get shown the bad news. He has ace-10 of hearts, rivering 2 pair. I show the jack, and afterwards he says he thought I had pocket jacks, which I guess makes sense as I might have played it in this way. I probably lost the minimum because if I did bet the flop and turn, I imagine he's never folding. Here we have round 2 against Think Blue Poker. I open at $15 with pocket deuces, and he 3-bets from the blinds to 55. I call, and we go heads up to a flop, which comes 10, 6, 3 rainbow. He c-bets 75. I'm not going to be folding here with a pair. We know how wild and crazy those Los Angeles players like to get. The turn is now a 9. He checks, and I check it back. I'm trying to get to showdown as cheaply as possible. The river is an offsuit queen. He checks once again, and I obviously don't think there's any point in betting here. He's never going to be folding any pairs. I check it back, and he announces ace high, showing ace deuce of diamonds. I think if he is going to take an aggressive line here by 3-betting preflop, then he has to have multiple streets of aggression. Just betting once on the flop isn't often going to get it done. If he isn't betting the turn, he should definitely be betting this river, as a queen is going to be much better for his range than it is mine. Something like 2/3 to 3/4 pot should get it done. I now switch tables as the vloggers were rotating to try to get in as many hands as possible with everyone who came. In the first one, I have ace king and open. The flop comes king, queen, jack, 3 ways, and a short stack jams all in for about $120 into a $90 pot. I call and ended up holding against his king X. The very next hand, I pick up ace 9 of spades and open. I get 2 callers. The flop comes ace high. I bet the flop and get 1 caller. The turn bings in the flush, which goes check, check. On the river, I decide to put in a blocker bet. He calls, and my ace is good. It's nice after being down right off the bat to pick up a couple of these smaller pots to finally start creeping back towards even. Now in this hand, there's an open to $10 from a gentleman who I shall refer to as Mr. Cardano, a really cool guy that I enjoyed chatting to about cryptocurrencies. There's a flat to his immediate left. I have pocket jacks on the button and make it 45. He'd been opening a lot, so I think he's going to be opening fairly wide. He ends up calling, and the player to his left folds. We go heads up to a flop, which comes ace high. After a bit of thought, he checks. I bet 1/3 of the pot, and he ends up folding fairly quickly. This next hand is an excellent illustration of the importance of choosing the correct bet sizings. There is an open to $20 from an older Asian gentleman. I flat in the cutoff with pocket 9s. One of the blinds calls, and we go 3 ways to a flop, which comes deuce, 4, 5 rainbow. The blind checks, and after a bit of thought, the older Asian gentleman decides to c-bet $60 into the $60 pot. Now I'm faced with a conundrum. Sure, I have an overpair, but even against his most likely holdings of like ace-king or ace-queen, he's still going to have 2 overs and a gut shot, and more importantly, he only has $200 left behind, so he's going to put me in a lot of tough spots on the turn. I eventually come to the conclusion that I don't have enough information on this player, and generally speaking, at this limit, when people decide to bet large, they're just going to have it, so I make the fold. I do believe that he most likely had a big pocket pair, and so I think he wants to choose a sizing that can get calls from worse. This sizing tell then sets us up for the next hand. Now in this hand, that same gentleman opens to 13, Mr. Cardano flats, and I look down at Jack 9 of clubs. I'm going to be 3-betting here, given the fact that I believe that if his good hands are opening to 20, then his medium strength hands will be opening to the smaller size of 13. I elect to make it $60. Sure enough, the opener folds, and Mr. Cardano is just not a fan of folding. He calls. We go heads up to a flop, which he announces to me has 2 aces. He checks, and here I think I want to be choosing a larger sizing, although on this flop I generally would be down betting. I think that if I down bet, I'm going to get a lot of floats, and I want to end the hand right here. I bet $80. He then goes into a spiel saying that I probably have king, queen high. I tell him, how about pocket kings? Are those any good? After some time, I could just kind of tell that he's not going to be continuing here. If he does continue, I think he's going to be fairly weak. Also, I think once he announces to me that there are 2 aces on the board, he just never really has one himself. After a bit of thought, he does thankfully fold, and I show him the bad news with the Jack 9 of clubs. I think this hand is an excellent illustration of taking in all the variables at the table in order to make the best decisions. The first being taking into account the preflop opener's change in sizing. Since he previously opened to $20, I'd expect that now that he's opening to $13, his hand is weaker. We can also consider that since Mr. Cardano just calls, he doesn't have any particularly strong hands himself. When Mr. Cardano just calls, I think we can expect his range to look like some pocket pairs, suited connectors, and maybe some of the weaker aces. So when the flop comes ace high, this is a much better board for our range, and I could start attacking his weaker holdings. He's going to have a really hard time continuing against multiple streets of aggression, as I'm the one who's going to have the hands like ace king and ace queen. If you've ever watched any of my previous videos, you know that it's very hard to make a good hand. The key to winning at no limit hold'em is aggression. That then brings us to the third and final table of the session. There's an open, I pick up pocket queens and 3-bet to 40, and unfortunately I don't get any action. But as you can see from across the table, we have a couple of other vloggers in Fish Poker and Doug McCusker. They actually get into a really fun and exciting hand that I got a video of the end. If you can, please go check out Doug McCusker's channel and check out his vlog from the day.
I have to call. What do you have? Please. No, I'm not good. No, really? Oh, set is good.
With the session winding down before we head to the bar, there are 2 last back-to-back hands that we have to discuss. In the first one, Doug McCusker straddles to 6. There is an open in middle position to 15. I'm on the button with king jack suited. This is a spot that I'd usually just 3-bet. Obviously, I want to be isolating the opponent and try to reduce the fields, but I decided I'll just flat here. Doug calls, and we go 3 ways to a flop, which comes king 7-3 with 2 hearts. It checks to me, and I expect having top pair here that I'm going to have the best hand a large percentage of the time. Generally speaking, I'm probably just going to be betting this flop, probably something like 75% of the time. But there are some situations where I decide to check back, just kind of based on randomization, to disguise the strength of my hand and try to get some later streets of value. I think if I bet here, it's going to be hard for opponents to continue with much worse, unless they have exactly a flush draw. I do think that if the preflop opener had a flush draw, he'd probably just be betting it. So I think it's much more likely that they either just have ace-high hands or some underpairs. I decided to check it back, and we go 3 ways to a turn, which is the 5 of hearts, completing the flush. Doug now decides to bet 25 into the both of us. The preflop opener calls, and here having top pair, I'm not going to be folding just yet. I don't think I can be raising either, so I decided to just call. At this point, what I'm hoping for is that the river isn't a heart, nor a straightening card like a 6 or a 4, and more importantly, that the both of them decide to check to me. I think if I have to face further aggression, I'm going to be in a really tough spot with top pair. The river is an offsuit 9, and now Doug thinks for a bit and checks. The middle position player checks as well, and with the action on me, I have a decision to make as to whether I want to be putting in a value bet. I think betting here is pretty thin, so I actually go into tank for a bit and start thinking that I'm most likely going to be checking back. I think that Doug actually ends up seeing this, seeing my indecision, and believing that I'm fairly weak, which I think he read pretty accurately. And then at this point, I finally do decide to go for some value, thinking that most of the likely nobody has a flush, and if anything, they possibly have some second pair type holding. I bet $75. Doug goes into the tank for a little bit, probably realizes that the player in between isn't fairly strong, and does eventually make the call. I let him know that I have king jack, and he lets me know that it's good. I think that by playing this hand in an untraditional manner in checking back the flop, I was able to eke out some extra value when I bet the river with top pair and show up with a holding that he wasn't expecting to see. From Doug's perspective, when I check back this flop and just call the turn, I think my hand looks a lot like some possible flush draws, maybe some straight draws. And so when I'm betting this river, it's going to look like I possibly missed those flush draws. Really, the only hands I'm representing are some 2-pair combinations, and I think that I'd probably play those in a different manner. In fact, on the turn when he bets 25 into 45 and the middle position player calls, I'm getting nearly 4-1 on a call, and so I'm going to be calling with a wide variety of hands. Some gut shots, some middle pocket pairs, some random hearts, and now when it checks to me on the river and everybody looks weak, it's very likely that I might try to steal this away. Thing is, I'd probably be betting much larger. And now we jump right into the very next hand, where I look down at, what? Pocket kings? Oh baby. It folds to me in the cutoff, and I open to $15, which has been my standard open in unlimited pots. Unfortunately, the button folds, the small blind folds, and action is on Doug in the big blind. Thankfully, he does decide to call, and we're going to be going heads up. The flop comes ace 7-7 with 2 clubs. Obviously not my favorite flop, but it's the one that they gave me. Doug now checks, and I'm faced with a decision as to whether to bet or check. I think obviously having kings on an ace 7-7 board, it is standard to check, but if I check, I'm going to be put in some tough spots if he decides to lead the turn, as I would be expected to be betting my aces. So I decided down bet $10, and that's when Doug hits me with the check raise to $25. I don't know what he's exactly representing here. I'm the one who's going to have the aces, and if he had an ace, I would expect him to just call. So really what he's representing is trip sevens, and trips are hard to make. I make the call, and we go heads up to a turn, which is an offsuit 8. At this point, he goes into the tank for a little bit and fires up the cannon to the tune of $50. This puts me in a bit of a blender. To be honest with you, at this point, I was actually leaning towards a fold. Sure, he's representing a pretty narrow range, but most of the time when people decide to get spicy, they just give up once called. And so when he's firing here on the turn again, I do feel that he obviously might have some draws, but I'd expect that he is still going to have some hands like 7x as well as an ace. Really what ends up leading me to make this turn call was the fact that he had lost a couple of hands. It feels like he might be tilting, and you know, when people are tilting, they do some crazy things. So eventually I do make the call for $50. We go heads up to a river, which is an offsuit queen. Thankfully for me, after a little bit of thought, he decides to check, and when he checks here, I'm happy to get the showdown. I check it back, and he announces that he has an 8, showing 8 to 9 of clubs for the flopped flush draw, turning the 8 and continuing the aggression. I actually like his play here, but I think it was just kind of poor timing for him. By check raising the flop, he gives himself a clear and immediate path to victory with 9 high, but the problem is that when he check raises, he is representing a pretty narrow range. As I said, I don't think an ace would be check raising, and so he either has a 7 or some draws. Unfortunately for him, he missed, and I was able to hold on for the victory. Shortly after that hand, we decided to call it a night and head over to the bar to catch up with all of the vloggers who had come into town. Thankfully, I was able to book a $35 win, which was really sweet after getting stuck right off the bat in that bomb pot. I'd like to thank Doug McCusker and Capital Casino for not only organizing such a great event, but inviting me to join along with all of the other vloggers who I have linked below. Make sure you check out their channel. Thanks for watching this video, and we'll see you in the next one.
Just like a cigarette smoke till it's in my head, take it all away. Yeah, I'ma light it up just like a cigarette smoke till it's in my head, take the bait away.